Have you ever stopped to think about what lies behind the brands of drinks you consume? Today I want to share with you a story that completely changed my life, a story that began in the shadows of witchcraft and ended in the light of God's love. My name is Raphael, and for years I was a witch. Yes, you heard right. I practiced rituals, manipulated energies and dove deep into a world that many only know through legends or horror movies. But what few know is that this world is not only real, it is closer to us than we imagine, and it was through something seemingly harmless that it reached me: alcoholic beverages. I lived in Sao Paulo, a busy city full of lights, noise and people chasing their dreams. At that time, I worked as a marketing consultant for large companies. My life seemed perfect from the outside: a modern apartment in the city center, an imported car and friends who admired me for my extravagant lifestyle. I frequented the best bars, tried the most expensive drinks and lived surrounded by people who, like me, sought pleasure and status above all else. But inside I was an empty man. At 32 years old I had already accumulated academic titles, earned impressive promotions and built an enviable reputation in the corporate market. However, none of this filled the void that was growing inside me. I felt an insatiable thirst, as if something fundamental was missing. It was in this context that I began to explore dark paths, trying to find answers to questions that not even I understood. It all started during a corporate event at a luxurious hotel on Avenida Paulista. It was an exclusive dinner for executives and high-ranking businessmen. Between drinks and superficial conversations I met Marcio, a charismatic and mysterious man who introduced himself as an expert in ancestral cultures. He had a penetrating gaze and refined manners, and quickly caught my attention when he mentioned that he knew secrets capable of further amplifying my influence in the market. Intrigued, I accepted his invitation for a private meeting. After the event that night, Marcio showed me something I will never forget: a detailed list of famous brands of alcoholic beverages that, according to him, were linked to black magic rituals. He explained that these brands used occult symbols on their labels and even in their advertising campaigns. What was even more shocking was when he told me that some of these companies made pacts with spiritual entities to ensure financial success. He talked about symbolic sacrifices, captured energies, and connections with invisible dimensions that I had never considered before. At first, I thought it was all absurd. How could anyone believe that a simple bottle of whiskey or a can of beer could be connected to supernatural forces? But the more I researched, the more evidence I found that certain brands had frightening connections with historical events involving human sacrifices and demonic invocations. I began to notice patterns in logos, slogans, and even in the ingredients used. It was as if someone was trying to send subliminal messages to consumers. This discovery made me obsessed. I began to frequent occult circles where I learned forbidden rituals and gained access to ancient knowledge. At first, this seemed empowering. I felt like I was gaining control over aspects of life that were previously intangible, but little by little my life began to fall apart. My personal relationships deteriorated, my physical and mental health was compromised, and I felt an evil presence accompanying me wherever I went. I remember a specific night when everything seemed to slip away in my control. I was home alone trying to perform a ritual that promised to increase my prosperity, but something went terribly wrong. I heard voices whispering incomprehensible words and a feeling of panic took over me. I ran to the window, but I couldn't open it. It was as if an invisible force was holding me there, slowly suffocating me. At that moment I realized I had gone too far. It was then that something happened, something that finally made me see the truth. But that is a part of the story that I will save for later on. In addition, I want to emphasize that this journey was not only about discovering dark truths, it also taught me precious lessons about faith, repentance and transformation. I used to believe that power and success were synonymous with happiness, but I learned that true peace comes from within, and that God was always waiting for me even in the moments when I rejected Him. If you feel like your life is lost or that you are stuck in destructive cycles, I want you to know that there is hope. No matter how far you have gone, it is never too late to seek the light. This is the central message of my testimony, and I couldn't wait to share the next chapters of this story with you. When you start to see patterns where before there was only normality, it's impossible to look away. That's exactly what happened to me. Each bottle, each label seemed to tell me a dark story that I didn't want to hear, but that I could no longer ignore. After that disturbing night when I felt something suffocating me in my own apartment, I decided to investigate Marcio's revelations further. He had mentioned some specific brands during our conversation and I needed to confirm if all of that was true. I started my research by looking at a small brewery called Black Mountain Beer, a virtually unknown brand that was only available in certain bars on the outskirts of Sao Paulo. At the time I didn't even know it existed, but when I saw its label for the first time I was paralyzed. The symbol of the Black Mountain was an inverted mountain with an eye on top. At first I thought it was just a modern design, but when I researched the hidden meaning of inverted mountains, I discovered that they represent portals to lower dimensions. It was as if the brewery itself was announcing its connection with evil forces. But what really gave me goosebumps was the brand slogan, "Darkness has flavor." How could someone create something like that without knowing the weight of words? My obsession grew even more when I found another brand, this time of whiskey solar. This whiskey, although it was little known, its packaging was extremely luxurious with golden details and symbols that resembled constellations. When analyzing the labels carefully I noticed that the stars formed an inverted pentagram, one of the oldest symbols used in black magic rituals. Besides that, the name Solaris had an ambiguous connotation. While Sol refers to light and life, the suffix Aris often appears in terms linked to the occult. It was as if the creators of the brand were playing with opposite concepts, confusing unprepared consumers. But the worst was yet to come. During a meeting with other practitioners of the occult, I met a man named Jonas who claimed to have worked in a large distillery. Before leaving the corporate world, he told a secret about a third brand of Aurora vodka that was distributed at exclusive events and private parties. Jonas says that the company held special ceremonies before launching new batches involving symbolic sacrifices and invocations of entities. When I asked for more details, he hesitated but ended up revealing that the company's executives were followers of a secret society that worshipped a spirit known as the Lord of the Waters. Apparently, they believed that offering part of their profits to this entity guaranteed financial success and protection against competitors. These discoveries made me completely obsessed. I began to collect bottles of these brands, studying every detail of their packaging and looking for subliminal messages. I spent entire days in libraries reading books about occult symbolism and comparisons between famous brands and esoteric practices. The more I learned, the more evidence I found. For example, I noticed that many of these brands used recurring numbers in their slogans or advertising campaigns, such as the number 666 or variations of it. Others had images of animals associated with them, the dark mythologies such as owls, a symbol of hidden wisdom, or serpents, a representation of temptation and deception. But curiosity has a price, and I soon began to pay dearly for my investigations. My behavior changed drastically. I spent entire nights awake researching and writing notes in notebooks. My hands were constantly shaking and I felt an unbearable pressure in my head as if something was trying to get into my mind. My friends began to move away, worried about my mental state. Even my girlfriend at the time, Clara, tried to warn me, "Raphael, you're changing this, it's not healthy," but I couldn't listen to her. I was convinced that I was unveiling truths that few had the courage to face. It was then that I received a direct warning. One morning, when I opened my mailbox, I found an envelope with no return address. There was a single sheet of paper with the following handwritten message: "Stop investigating what you shouldn't. Some secrets are not meant to be revealed." The note didn't have a signature, but I immediately recognized Marcio's handwriting. He was warning me or threatening me, I didn't know for sure, but those words echoed in my mind for days. Despite the growing fear, I decided to move forward. I needed to understand how far these connections reached. I started to visit abandoned temples, old mansions and even isolated forests where secret rituals supposedly took place. On one of these expeditions I witnessed something I will never forget. It was a cold and damp night and I had been informed by an anonymous source about a ceremony that would take place in a clearing on the outskirts of Sao Paulo. Hidden behind a tree, I observed a group of people wearing black hoods forming a circle around a table covered with black candles and bottles of alcoholic beverages. Among them I clearly recognized a bottle of Solar whiskies. They started to sing in a strange language, something that sounded like Latin but distorted. Then one of the participants lifted the bottle and poured the liquid on the floor, forming a circle around the group. When they finished, everyone drank directly from another bottle that I couldn't identify. The scene was terrifying and I felt my body trembling involuntarily. It was at that moment that I realized that I had crossed an invisible limit. I was no longer just an observer, was now part of it. When I returned home, I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was just a harmless cult, or maybe it was all a coincidence. But the more I tried to convince myself that it wasn't real, the more signs appeared. Objects in my house began to move on their own and I heard voices whispering my name at night. I got to the point where I slept with the light on. But even that didn't bring me comfort. It was during this period of despair that something extraordinary happened. A childhood friend, Lucas, who I hadn't seen in years, showed up at my door, unexpectedly. He was an evangelical pastor and, upon noticing my weakened state, insisted on talking to me. I reluctantly told him everything I had discovered and experienced in the last few months. To my surprise, Lucas didn't judge me. Instead, he told me about God's love and how he can free anyone from darkness, no matter how lost they are. That conversation planted a seed of hope in my heart, but I wasn't ready to embrace faith yet. I needed to face more obstacles before finally finding the light, and this is where the next phase of my journey comes in. There are moments in life when everything changes for me. This moment came when I realized that the forces I had challenged were not just stories or superstitions, they were real and closer than I could ever imagine. After that conversation with Lucas, something inside me began to change. He left me a copy of the Bible highlighting specific verses about spiritual liberation and God's unconditional love. At first, I resisted. My mind was full of doubts and fear. As someone who had spent years immersed in the occult, I thought it was too late for me. I thought God wouldn't accept someone like me, someone who had touched the darkness and allowed it to invade his life. But the signs kept appearing. One night, while I was trying to sleep, I had a vivid dream that changed everything. I found myself in a dark place surrounded by shadowy figures whispering incomprehensible words. I felt an oppressive presence as if something was sucking my vital energy. Then suddenly an intense light burst on the horizon, dispelling the shadows. A calm and powerful voice echoed, "Raphael, you are lost but you can still be found. Come back to me." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, but also with a sense of relief that I had not felt in months. That experience shook me deeply. For the first time, I began to question my choices. Did I really have control over what I had become involved in, or had I been deceived and used as a pawn in a game much bigger than I could understand? I decided to call Lucas and ask for help. He came to my house the next day, bringing with him 2 other pastors. They prayed for me for hours, interceding against the evil forces that I knew were hovering over my life. At first, I felt resistance. It was as if something inside me was fighting against those prayers. My body was shaking and a sharp pain ran through my head, but at few peace began to take hold of me. When I finally opened my eyes, I felt a lightness that I had not experienced years ago. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. Lucas smiled and said, "God has already started working on you. Now it's time to walk towards the light." In the following days I decided to do something I had never imagined. I completely gave up alcohol. Every bottle I had collected, all those obscure brands I had investigated so fervently, were thrown in the trash. I knew I couldn't just ignore what I had discovered. I needed to completely break away from that world. I also started attending church with Lucas, where I learned more about the power of faith and the divine purpose for my life. But the process of liberation was not easy. There were times when I felt a strong temptation to return to the past. One night while driving through the deserted streets of Sao Paulo, I passed in front of a bar where I used to drink with friends. I stopped the car and stood paralyzed, watching the bright lights and hearing laughter coming from inside. For a brief moment I missed that superficial life of the false sense of freedom that alcohol provided. But then I remembered the voices. whispers of the ritual in the forest and the crushing weight of darkness. I quickly left the determined not to look back. Another big challenge was facing my social circle. Many of my friends did not understand my transformation. Some laughed at me saying I had become a fanatic. Others simply walked away unable to deal with the new version of Raphael. Even Clara, my ex-girlfriend, tried to convince me to go back. "You are wasting your life," she said, but I knew it wasn't. It was the first time I felt like I was really living. It was during this period that I decided to use my knowledge to warn other people. I started to write about my experiences, documenting everything I had discovered about beverage brands, and their possible links to occult practices. I knew that many people consumed these products without having any idea of what could be behind them. I wanted to help others see the truth just as I had finally seen. My first publication was on a small blog that I created anonymously. I called it The Dark Secrets of the Drinks You Consume. In it I detailed my discoveries about Black Mountain Beer, Solar Whiskey and Aurora Vodka, explaining the hidden symbols and patterns I had identified. To my surprise, the post quickly went viral. I received hundreds of messages from shocked and grateful people for sharing that information. Some of them reported experiences similar to mine, while others expressed concern and curiosity. But not everything was rosy. A few days later, I received an anonymous message in my email that say, "You opened a door that should have remained closed. Prepare yourself for the consequences." The note did not contain a signature, but I immediately recognized the veiled threat. It was as if the same forces I had faced were trying to intimidate me again. Despite the fear, I decided to back down. I knew that God was with me and that my mission was greater than any threat. I continued writing and sharing my discoveries, this time adding personal stories about my spiritual transformation. It was at that moment that I realized that my journey was not just about survival, it was about redemption. And it was then that something extraordinary happened. A Christian businessman came into contact with me offering support to expand my work. He helped me create a YouTube channel where I could reach an even larger audience. I remember the first recording. I was nervous but also excited. Finally, I had a platform to tell my story and warn people about the dangers I had faced. From then on, my life took a new direction, but there were still challenges ahead, and some of them would test my faith in ways I could never have imagined. With the support of the Christian businessman and the growing audience of my channel, I began to gain visibility. The purpose was clear: to warn people about the dangers hidden in certain brands of beverages and help them see that there is a better path, the path of faith. But as I learned throughout this journey, all transformation requires sacrifice, and facing the past is never easy. Soon after creating the channel, I realized that my public life was starting to attract unwanted attention. I received several threatening messages, some more aggressive than others. One of them said, "You are playing with fire. If you don't stop now, you will regret it." Another contained distorted images of me, digitally manipulated to make it look like I was surrounded by shadows. Despite this, I decided not to be intimidated. I knew that these provocations were an attempt to divert me from the purpose that God had placed in my heart. But the threats didn't stop there. One night, when I was returning home after recording a video, I noticed a black car parked near my building. Its headlights were off and no one got out. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but in the following days, the same vehicle appeared in different places I frequented. It was then that I decided to seek professional help. I hired a security guard recommended by Lucas, and I started to take extra precautions, such as avoiding predictable routines and sharing fewer personal details online. This period was extremely challenging, but it also taught me valuable lessons about trust and perseverance. I learned that faith is not just about feeling peace or comfort. Sometimes it is about facing fear head-on, knowing that God is by your side. Every threatening message, every scary sign was an opportunity to strengthen my trust in Him. Little by little, I realized that those trials only increased my determination. As I dealt with these difficulties, I decided to expand my work. I started visiting churches and Christian communities, sharing my testimony in person. It was moving to see the impact my words had on people. On one of these occasions, I met Sonia, a young woman who had struggled with alcoholism for years. She told me that after watching one of my videos, she finally understood that the problem was not just physical or emotional, there was something spiritual involved. She decided to give up her addiction and seek help in faith. Seeing her transformation made me realize the real power of redemption. However, not all reactions were positive. Some critics began to question my motivations, accusing me of fabricating stories to gain notoriety. One journalist even published an article entitled "The Former Witch Who Became a Christian Influencer, Fraud or Faith." He highlighted inconsistencies in some of the symbols I had mentioned, suggesting that I was interpreting coincidences too much. Although this frustrated me, I decided not to respond directly. Instead, I used this episode as an opportunity to reflect on the importance of focusing on what really matters, helping people, not proving anything to critics. Another challenge came from within the church itself. Some people questioned whether I should be speaking openly about witchcraft and the occult, arguing that this could attract negative energy. Lucas, always supportive, reminded me of a Bible verse that says, "Everything exposed to the light becomes light." He explained that by bringing these truths to light, I was helping others to free themselves, not perpetuating evil. This guidance gave me clarity and encouragement to continue. It was in this context that I decided to launch a project even more ambitious, to write a book about my journey entitled "From Darkness to Light: The Testimony of a Former Wizard." It would be a detailed compilation of everything I experienced, from the disturbing discoveries about the brands of drinks to my spiritual transformation. I worked on it for months, reviewing every word carefully to ensure it conveyed the right message. When it was finally published, I received incredible feedback from readers who said they found hope in my words. At the same time, I started working on a new social project together with Lucas and other religious leaders. We founded a support group for people who struggled with addictions and negative spiritual influences. We called the project Light on the Path, and it quickly gained momentum. We organized weekly meetings where people could share their struggles, pray together and receive guidance. It was deeply gratifying to see how many lives were being positively impacted. But even with all this progress, there were still moments of doubt. There were nights when I wondered if I was really making a difference or if I was just rowing against the tide. At those times I remembered a verse that Lucas had shown me at the beginning of the journey: "Be strong and courageous, because the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." These words always gave me strength to move forward. One day I received an unexpected letter. It was from a woman named Marta who lived in a small town in the interior of Brazil. She said she had watched one of my videos and had decided to give up the alcohol addiction that had destroyed her marriage and distanced her children. Marta said that after surrendering herself to God, she was able to rebuild her life, and today she was a leader in a local church. She ended the letter with these words: "You may not know who I am, but I want you to know that your story saved mine." That message brought tears to my eyes. It was a powerful reminder that regardless of the difficulties, it is worth continuing to fight for good. This phase of my life was marked by both achievements and challenges. I learned that overcoming does not mean the absence of problems. It means finding the strength to face them with faith and purpose. Although there were still obstacles ahead, I knew that I was on the right path now. As I moved forward in this new phase, another twist was about to happen, one that would put to the test everything I had learned so far. There are times in life when you need to decide who you really are. To me, this moment arrived when all the choices I had made up until then were put to the test. Despite all the progress I had made, the success of the channel, the launch of the book, and the impact of the social project Luz no Camino, I knew that I was not yet completely free from the shadows of my past. The threats kept coming, increasingly persistent. One morning when I opened my email box, I found a message different from the others: "You can't escape from those who have gone before. Come meet us at midnight in the place where it all began." There was no signature, but I immediately recognized the intimidating tone. Those words echoed in my mind for hours. Where was the place where it all began? I reflected on it throughout the day and finally realized it was the luxurious hotel on Avenida Paulista where I first met Marcio and heard his disturbing revelations. I knew that going there would be dangerous, but I also felt that I couldn't simply ignore it. It was as if some invisible force was pushing me to definitively face my past. I talked to Lucas about the message and he tried to dissuade me. Raphael, this could be a trap, he said, worried, but something inside me insisted that this was an opportunity to resolve the pending issues that still haunted me. I decided I would go, but with precautions. I took my bodyguard Carlos with me and asked Lucas to pray for me before leaving. He placed his hands on my head and prayed fervently, asking for protection and wisdom. At 11:45 p.m., I arrived at the hotel. Nervous but determined, I entered cautiously, avoiding drawing attention. The lobby was empty except for a night clerk behind the counter who barely looked up to look at me. I went up to the hall where the corporate dinner had taken place years ago. When I opened the door, I was paralyzed. The environment was lit only by black candles arranged in a circle. In the center there was a table covered with bottles of the brands I had investigated so much: Black Mountain Beer, Solar Whiskey and Aurora Vodka. And the sitting at the table was Marcio. He looked exactly the same as the last time I saw him, but his eyes had a strange glow, almost supernatural. I knew you would come, he said with a cold smile. You were always too curious to resist. Why did you bring me here? I asked, trying to stay calm even though my heart was racing. Do you want to know the truth, Raphael? The whole truth. He slowly stood up and walked towards me. These marks, they are just the tip of a much larger iceberg. There are ancient forces operating in this world. Forces that you will never fully understand, and contrary to what you think, you have never escaped them. I felt a shiver run through my body. Arlos, who was hiding outside, quickly entered when he noticed the tone of the conversation, but Marcio didn't even move. Instead he laughed, a low and sinister laugh that echoed through the room. Do you think God can protect you here? He asked, pointing to the candles. This place is sealed, no prayer can reach it now. It was then that something extraordinary happened. I remembered Lucas' words, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I closed my eyes for a brief moment and began to pray out loud. I prayed with all the faith I had, asking for protection and deliverance. As I spoke, I felt a powerful presence filling my atmosphere. The candles began to go out one by one until the room was completely dark. When he opened his eyes again, Marcio had disappeared. The bottles on the table were broken, spilling liquids into the corners. It was as if something had been expelled from there. Carlos looked at me in disbelief, but I knew what had happened. God had intervened. We left the hotel quickly without looking back. On the way back home I remained silent, processing what I had just witnessed. I knew that that final confrontation marked the closing of an important chapter in my life. The forces I feared so much were no match for divine power. It was an undeniable victory, but also a reminder that spiritual battle is real and constant. In the following days I decided to publicly share what had happened. I recorded a video detailing the encounter with Marcio and the decisive role that faith played. At that moment I received thousands of comments from people who said they had felt the presence of God while watching the story. Many of them confessed that they were also facing spiritual struggles and that my testimony gave them the courage to seek help. But the impact didn't stop there. Shortly after, I received a call from an investigative journalist named Roberto. He had seen my video and decided to investigate the connections I had mentioned between the beverage brands and occult practices. After months of research, he published a series of explosive reports revealing internal documents and testimonies from former employees that confirmed some of my findings. Although the companies denied any involvement with occult rituals or symbolism, the media amplified the debate, leading many consumers to rethink their choices. The repercussions were enormous. Some supermarket chains decided to remove certain brands from their shelves, and Christian movements began to promote educational campaigns on conscious consumption. I became a central figure in this movement, being invited to give lectures, interviews, and events all over Brazil. However, the most significant thing of all was the personal transformation I continued to experience. That night in the hotel taught me that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always a way out.